for the raising the price of that medication. And I explained, I think it's a lot more complicated than that. He's explained this at length in multiple interviews. You can just watch them. But I feel like you do a much better job of explaining the price hike and why it was justified, why it made sense than I did then. So if you can get into that a little bit, that'd be really helpful.
Well, I think there's just sort of there's a direct correlation between how little you know about medicine and pharmaceuticals and how angry this situation makes you. And there's a bit of a logical fallacy there, but that's kind of not where I'm going. So stay with me for a second. That if you don't understand pharma and you don't know how pharma works, you end up getting really mad about this. And of course, you might say immediately the reaction is, well, just because it happens a lot doesn't mean that we don't have a right to get angry over it. And that's a good point, and I'll go through why one shouldn't be angry over this. But the first thing to understand is most people who get mad about this don't understand pharma at all, because I often get this reaction of like, well, if you raise the price so much, how can people afford it? And of course, when you're given a number X and then you're told the price of something goes up by 50X, right? The new price is 50 times X, but I didn't tell you what the old price was. And the problem is that most people know that, for instance, it went from 13 to 750. So 50 times 750 is a big number, and that's a big number. How can anybody afford that? But I've been in pharma since I mentioned I was, at least on the Wall Street side, since I was a kid. And one of the things that isn't well understood is there are drugs that cost $250,000 or $300,000 or even $1 million a year. And those are fairly routine. So Daraprim's about $50,000, which makes it kind of a middle price drug. It's not even a high price drug in my opinion. And you only have to take it once because it works a little like an antibiotic. It just kills the parasite that's killing you. And so it's a life-saving drug. It's an important drug, but it's $50,000. Whereas there are drugs that some of which I've kind of been behind these companies or an investor of these companies, but there's dozens of drugs that are several $100,000 a year. And people don't get mad at that. I asked one professor who was mad at me at some university lecture. He said, how do you expect people to afford that? I said, well, I don't see you protesting Soliris, which is $600,000 a year for the rest of your life, mind you. So just 10 years on that drug, which, people are going to need that drug even longer than that. Just 10 years on that drug is $6 million for the drug company. That makes Daraprim look like a drop in the bucket, and it is a drop in the bucket. It's an irrelevant drug. Only a few hundred people even need Daraprim every year. So the idea that anybody would be mad about this, that it would, especially from a personal perspective, is outrageous, right? There's no need to be upset about this personally. Is it a theoretical question of concern? Sure. And we can talk about that. But for one person to be upset about this, I mean, the odds that you'll ever meet somebody that ever needs this drug are extremely small. And again, if you're not being mad at the company that made that $600,000 drug, it's called Alexion. If you're not protesting Alexion, why are you protesting me? Drugs are expensive. That's sort of something that we'll talk about in a minute, but that's sort of the nature of the beast. Now, again, you could say, well, drugs are expensive, sure, but they don't go from a small price to a large price overnight very often. Well, actually, they often will. And what ends up happening is you have drugs that are old that don't have their price increased every year because if a company has a merger or whatever happens. There are some drugs that have the price of a really old price, say from the 60s or 70s, and then they have their price changed to make it a more normal price. And you might say, well, why would you do that? Why raise the price indiscriminately for no reason? Well, there is a reason. Drugs need to have some kind of profit motive for somebody to make them. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, gee, I think I might start a factory and make penicillin today. Especially if you know how drugs are made. They're not just like two chemists sitting in a vat and mixing something up. You actually have to do something called CGMP, which is Current Good Manufacturing Protocols. And that sounds simple, but it's actually really difficult. It costs millions of dollars to comply with CGMP and FDA regulations, including their inspections and things like that. So even making a drug, really any drug on planet Earth, requires at least a couple $1 million. So if your drug's only selling a couple $1 million, you have zero incentive to make it. Now that's not good news if you're the patient that needs that drug to survive. And in fact, I've taken drugs before that one big drug company called Solvay decided they were going to stop making a gallstone drug. And they decided to do that because there was a better gallstone drug out there and their business went down a lot. So that makes sense, right? Okay, people can just use the new gallstone drug. But what they didn't realize is their gallstone drug was also a cure for a really rare genetic disease called CTX, cerebrotendinous xanthomatosis. Nobody's ever heard of CTX. Only 60 people in America have CTX. Solvay didn't know that CTX even existed. So Solvay said, you know what, as of this date, the gallstones drug is discontinued. So if you had CTX, you're now been sentenced to death because a big drug company doesn't realize you exist and they don't care about you. It's 60 people, it's $1,000 a year. It doesn't even come close to making enough money to bear making. Guess who ended up buying that drug? Yes, yours truly. And if you know what happened, I raised the price of the drug quite a lot. And I was thanked. I was thanked by the patients for jumping in and saving everybody. Because sure enough, Solvay wasn't going to do that. And I couldn't afford to pay to keep the price of $1,000. So it ended up being a very, very expensive drug, but just enough to make money for me, just enough to make money for the company and the manufacturing, and just enough for the patients. And it ended up being kind of a happy story. So a really happy story. If you like, I took one of the families out to dinner, and I took them to a WWE event. We all had a blast, and said, gee, if it wasn't for kind of the miracle of capitalism, nobody would ever make this drug. So in any event, drug pricing is a really complicated area, and invariably, I find that the people who know a lot about drugs inevitably are the people that kind of understand where I'm coming from, and the people that have no clue about medicine, or especially people who are young and idealistic. Maybe I'll be pejorative for a second and say your average Bernie supporter or somebody like that. Like, these are the people that don't understand it and think it's unconscionable and this and that, and it really defies reality if you think about it and just understand it. Now, it also happens to be a really easy media trope and media story and narrative, so I'm not surprised that folks in the media took it. That's their job, is to take the mundane and make it exciting. So my story is actually fairly mundane, but it can be made saucier and sexier and really interesting by sort of taking it and shifting the narrative and personifying it, right? Instead of it being Pfizer or Merck and a spokesperson contacted by Johnson & Johnson said that, no, you got it all wrong. No, it's this person that you can, sort of fill them out. So as an individual and as a bad guy. So in any event, that's sort of my quick take on it. It gets so much more detailed and so much more interesting. But again, you have to be kind of interested in pharma and pricing and things like that to really understand it all.
Okay. That was a very detailed answer. And like I said, you did a much better job explaining that than I did the other day. Next up, we've got Russia Defender, who's been spamming my DMs. Russia Defender, you're up.
All right, so let's get some W's for the jury that convicted this loser, bro. Let's get some W's for the jury in chat.
Okay,
jury.
Don't yell into them. Just calm the fuck
down.
All
right, let's get into this. So listen, my son. Here's the problem, right? The problem isn't that you have any good arguments about pharmaceuticals, because maybe you do. You're just a criminal, dude. You got convicted. The jury decided. The black Twitter has decided. The conservatives have decided. Everyone's decided this. So that you are now a jury of the public opinion, and the people have decided this. So whether you're right or wrong doesn't matter. We don't care. The facts don't matter here. The public has decided you're guilty, so you're guilty. Second point, I want to know, how many people do you think you killed as a result of what you did? Go ahead.
I would say, so I guess your first question wasn't a question, right? Just to be clear.
No, I'm just humiliating you. Go ahead, my son. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. And the second question is, I've actually saved thousands of lives over my career. How many have you saved?
I've debated Russia, Ukraine, and I've given money to the Russian armed forces. So I've saved many Russian lives against the Nazis in Ukraine. Yeah.
Okay. By donating, you saved somebody's life?
Yeah, I saved the Russian soldier's life. I probably paid for someone's armor and then protected him from some nationalists killing him. So,
how much money have you donated?
That's confidential information. I don't need a Fed to question me on how much money.
Right?
So don't Fed pose, dude.
Probably
listen, I know you want to
much.
nerd and monologue and bore the whole VC.
No, probably.
Nobody wanted this AMA, so we're going to now destroy you as a result of it.
Let's face facts. You're probably, what are you, 20 years old, if that? You sound very young.
Oh, does it matter, though?
Yeah.
Does it matter? You're still getting obliterated, right? So here's the thing, Martin. No. Shut up, my son. My son, be quiet. Shut up, dude. Shut up. Just stop talking.
You sound like a teenager.
Hold on. Russia, calm down.
You sound like a teenage kid that doesn't know anything.
Okay, Russia, you got the mic for a bit, and you're just yelling over the guests. Don't do that. That's rude. You can have a conversation, but don't just yell.
Okay, so I want to apologize to Martin for absolutely nothing. Now, next, as it relates to the court case, even if you did nothing wrong with the pharmaceuticals, why were you convicted? Go ahead.
Well, I wasn't charged with that as a crime, so I think you just...
Yeah, but you were convicted of something else, right?
Yeah, but if you want to ask me a question, maybe you should do at least a tiny...
So were you innocent?
maybe you should do a tiny bit of research before you just.
Well,
it sounds like you're just blustering.
Well,
Okay, were you innocent?
Yeah, I pleaded not guilty. I didn't.
one of the breads I sold, it was expiring today.
So
Sorry.
what? I'm gonna ask you.
I got like background on it.
Do you have someone?
Okay,
with
so what did Tyrone do to you in prison? Can I ask that?
you?
Okay, now you're just being a dickhead. Okay, thank you, Russian.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, thank you.